Yeah, I know, but I just had to pull him up before I stood up. Mr. Speaker, I am obviously pleased to have the opportunity to speak today. And I've spoken in a number of different throne speeches through the year. And one thing that I find interesting and intriguing about throne speeches is that the side that sits where the sun doesn't get in your eyes when you're in the other place will talk about how great their record is. And the side who sits in the seats that the sun will always get in your eyes and no one will close the blinds on the other side will criticize the record and say how they could do things better. And Mr. Speaker, what is interesting about that is that often is the nature of politics. And as I have grown with experience in the service of people, it becomes more interesting and more intriguing to listen to those comments. And also, Mr. Speaker, as I have grown with experience and scars from politics, Mr. Speaker, from not getting everything right, I realize now more than ever, people are tired of that type of debate. Now, before I go any further, I want to congratulate the Honorable Minister. He spoke for about 45, 50 minutes. And while I didn't agree with everything he said, I thought it was a well-presented speech. He had obviously done his homework. He spoke with passion. He spoke with commitment. And the minister has shown that he cares about the direction that we all want to go in, and that's progress. The minister is very good at politics, but he spoke about progress, and I found him to be accessible and care about what's going on. So I commend the Honorable Minister for that. My comments today will support some of what the Honorable Minister said, but I want to draw some constructive comparison to the challenges we face. And so as I say that, Mr. Speaker, let me start here by saying earlier, with the experience I've had in politics and some of the scars that I've gained in politics, it is very clear to me that in 2022, while we say we hear the people, while we say we listen to the people, and we all say that the people support us, sometimes and too often, we get disconnected from the people because we start to believe our own message without actually having the people hear it and then listen to what they say. That's a criticism of every government that I've known in the history of me following politics. You get caught up in your own message and you believe it so much like it will be the be-all and end-all, but you're starting to miss some of the root elements of success that you need to have to move forward. And so the Honorable Minister's speech, he did a good job of talking about some of the progress that the PLP has made and some of the justice. And I know the Honorable Minister, as a former labor person in capacity, but he still has labor in his heart, in his roots, stands for justice. And I think all of us in this House also stand for justice. Some might say stand for what is right and good, and we work towards it. And every government of this country along the way has pushed for justice. But it's up to the people to decide if that has actually come fast enough. And so the honorable member, his mother, when he asked her, and it appears he has a strong mother, and that is a good sign. Grandmother, and strong mother too, but that's a good sign, because when you have your family tell you what you really need to hear and not what you expect to hear. Like, my mother listens to Parliament all the time, and she'll always call me. And in the beginning, she would always say, especially when it was a rough day in Parliament, "Oh, you did a good job today. You did a good job today." I said, "Mom, I expect you to say that." But when I came home from school with a bad report card, I didn't get out of the car until you gripped my ear. So I want you to tell me how I can do better in representing. And so now she tells me the tough love, but it appears that the honorable minister's grandmother tells him the tough love because, yeah, things have got better, but more change is needed. And that's what it's about in life, Mr. Speaker. More change is always needed. You can't get disconnected from reality. And the old saying that you don't understand a man's troubles or a woman's troubles until you can walk in their shoes is true. And the successful politician learns how to understand how Minister Weeks is feeling in his shoes when he goes through some type of tragedy. And so I'm saying this today because, Mr. Speaker, we all need to have more understanding of what our people are really feeling, because in 2022, after the challenges we face with COVID and the war in Ukraine and the cost of living hitting the country, and I'll go into those in some more detail in the hour I have, Mr. Speaker. No, I saw the clock just started. I was wondering if it was malfunctioning. Got me covered. I knew you would. You knew you could. But, Mr. Speaker, with all those challenges, and I think most people who know me well enough will know that I can play politics, but I'll be fair. Mr. Speaker, we face huge challenges in our country right now. And this is not blaming the PLP, the current government. For any government to come up here and try to cast it that we've made significant progress, we're doing a disservice to our people. Mr. Speaker, if you'll allow me to refer to a statement by the Honorable Premier this morning in regards to, it's titled, the new $50 million guarantee. And here's the context which I need to speak to, Mr. Speaker, for all of us to do better and for the people to be in a better position this afternoon, tonight. The Honorable Premier said on the bottom of a page as he was coming to the close, second last paragraph, he said, while the opposition talks, this government has a real record of delivery. I'm not going to get into the record of delivery. We will continue to execute Bermuda's economic recovery plan, which has contributed to the best economic growth of the island since 2007. The best economic growth to the island since 2007, Mr. Speaker. That's what jumped off that page to me. So we're going back 15 years. 10 of those years, the PLP was in government. They won't speak to the 5 years the OBA was in government other than criticism, and that's cool. That's party politics. But if I put that out on social media tonight, or I walk around the streets over the weekend and I say, do you think that this government has delivered the best economic growth in this island since 2007? The comments would be negative at best, because people aren't feeling that. We've already acknowledged that the cost of living is out of control. That's not the PLP's fault. That is something that is difficult to get a handle on. Governments all over the world, even some of the largest countries who produce a lot, export a lot, are struggling with it just as much as we are. But in a small community, you feel it more, Mr. Speaker. So that record there, the best economic growth. And so I asked the government today, show the people what you really mean by that. Give us the facts that relate to them here in November 2022. Because if you can, maybe we are in a better position to getting some more progress, to seeing some more justice. But I cannot believe that that statement is correct. And so herein lies the real challenge, Mr. Speaker. And if you allow me to then reflect on the government's throne speech. The Honorable Premier says that, and I quote back to the last page, page 9, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Premier, Madam President, members of the Senate, and I acknowledge Madam President in the room this afternoon. I appreciate her interest in the debate. Members of the House of Assembly, another vestige of the British colonial influence is the Westminster system and its core adversarial nature. Well, Mr. Speaker, yes, but that's politics. It's like that in the States. It's probably worse. They just had midterm elections and all they talk about is we saved democracy. What do you mean? Democracy is allowing your people to have the freedom of expression and to go and vote. How did you save democracy? You haven't done anything yet. But see, here we as politicians, we like to spin it and the people just will shake their heads. Well, that's not correct. But what really bothered me about that, the model sees honorable members facing off against each other, which I already acknowledge that we need to do better. References to this style of government as a healthy democracy seem not to reflect the developments in those areas where this system endures. And then the Honorable Premier goes on to say, on August 1st, 620, that's that 400 years ago, Minister, you were talking about, Governor Butler addressed the first sitting of this legislature, and in the words that apply to the women and the men elected and appointed to serve even today, the Honorable Premier wrote and the Deputy Governor wrote out, Mr. Speaker, read out, come hither. We must bring equal minds with us. That is to say, without having our minds so preoccupied and taken up before, as no room is left for justice and right. And the Premier goes on that we need to work together, Mr. Speaker. Well, that comment about the best economic growth on this island since 2007 clearly doesn't allow us to do that, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we get caught up and progress and justice is impeded by the handbrake we put on as politicians, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another point that I wanted to touch on was the Honorable Minister made the comment, I wrote it down, and I think it's fairly accurate, if I can read my scribble. And this comment, to me, also outlines the challenge that we as politicians face. I talked about the challenge of party politics and getting removed from the reality that we face, Mr. Speaker. But here's another challenge that we face. The Honorable Minister said, if you find yourself in this country in a position of need, this government is here to assist you. And I think everyone in this chamber and the other chamber would support the sentiment of those comments, Mr. Speaker, because governments are there to serve the people, governments are there to help the people, and governments are there to put up a framework to allow progress and prosperity, and also a safety net to allow individuals who are struggling to get some type of support. And having said that, Mr. Speaker, but think about it. Again, we as members of Parliament make a statement that is so deep that if you take it in any context, it can be spun in different ways. And I draw this back to one of the big challenges we have today is immigration, Mr. Speaker. We, as far as I know, and maybe the minister can give an update sometime down the road, we don't know the exact numbers of people who have left the country with a plan not to return. That plan might change. They can always return. You're Bermuda, you can always come back. But people have emigrated and the reasons why they emigrate. And so herein is one of the challenges that we face, because quite often people emigrate because they have educational opportunities. And once they get there, then the educational opportunity is something that allows them to capitalize on a work responsibility and opportunity in another place. And they can't meet that same opportunity here. Other times, Mr. Speaker, it's because of the cost of living. And something blew me out of the water first thing this morning, Mr. Speaker. I wake early every day, try to get in a little bit of exercise, keep my heart racing so I don't get too upset up here. I went down to the gas station. I need some caffeine on my way to work. Just when it opened up and I got a coffee down there. And the gentleman was reading the paper over in the corner. When I came in, he came over to me and said, Dunkley, let me tell you something. I never ask people for any money. I said, well, I don't loan people money. I'll help people where I can, but it's not giving money. But he said, no. He said, I need some money because it's cheaper to be homeless in the UK than homeless in Bermuda. And I was blown away. I didn't know what to say. So I went, ordered my coffee. I came back to him and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You guys talk so much up there that you have more people now struggling to make ends meet. I want to leave the island. I can't even afford to leave the island, so I'm stuck. I'm stuck in paradise." Now, Mr. Speaker, that's not just a PLP problem. That's a Bermuda problem that we face with the cost of living. There's no doubt people are leaving Bermuda because of the cost of living. It could be seniors with the cost of living there and the cost of insurance. And government has said that they are trying their best to put some programs in place to help out. And I think allowing seniors to work past retirement is certainly a way to go, because so many people want to continue to work. I think it helps keep them younger. And I know a number of people over that magic age that want to continue to work, and they should be continued allowed to work. But a lot of people here also are immigrating nowadays because young people, because they need to get away. They are being harassed or bullied in schools here, and they need to get away to a safer environment. Or some people are running away because they want to leave something behind, good or bad. And also, Mr. Speaker, back to this comment I made. If you are in a government, if you're in a country and they need help, this government will assist you. This last remark goes right back to that comment. I had a gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that used to work for me, a good worker. Brought him in. He had some challenges. We helped get him straight. He was working hard, but he wouldn't take care of himself. Got overweight, smoked, was eating way too much. My brother found him one day. I'm not mentioning any names, so it's anonymous. And I don't think this gentleman would have a problem with me even say this story, because he calls me all the time. My brother had to rush him. He was a picker, rush him from picking because he was having a heart attack on the job. He was 60, 70 pounds overweight, smoking. We knew it had to happen. We tried to work with him to get through it. And we told him it was unsustainable what he was doing. We couldn't have him doing that type of work. You know what he did, Mr. Speaker? He immigrated to the UK because his daughter lived over there. He still calls me now and tells me how great the life is because the UK has given him dwelling. They take care of his health care. He's had 3 more heart attacks, and he has to have care come in every day. They take care of his meal, and he still has a little extra cash to do some of the side activities he wanted to do. So, Mr. Speaker, for us as politicians to say, if there's a need, we will help you. But sometimes, Mr. Speaker, that help we give people has to be able to get them to go in the right direction. Because once you give people something for nothing, they'll never want to take it back, and they'll never want to change. That real life story tells you that, Mr. Speaker. So here's the challenge that we find, Mr. Speaker. And I know the Honorable Minister talked about financial assistance, and it is a tough one to deal with because everyone has their stories. And where do you draw the line of what is appropriate and what is inappropriate, Mr. Speaker? That's the challenge we face. So now more than ever, when we're dealing with an economy that's struggling, a cost of living that's as high as I've ever remembered in my life, and I remember in the 79, 80 when I first graduated from university, it was quite high, but nothing like this, Mr. Speaker. These type of challenges we face never have any totally correct answers. They have initiatives that are good, but somehow you have to wean people off those and get them back into the mainstream of contributing. And that's the challenge we have in Bermuda. Like the Honorable Minister said, that they have an economic plan. They want to continue to support international business, and that's 28% of our economy. And we in the opposition know that we need to do that. I've spoken about it a number of times, and I give the government all the kudos for continuing to nurture international business, because without them, things would be much worse off than they are today, Mr. Speaker. There's no doubt about it. Without them, things would be much worse off than they are today, Mr. Speaker. But we cannot forget while Bermuda is still considered a blue chip jurisdiction, we are losing ground, Mr. Speaker. And we cannot forget, Mr. Speaker, and I see the Premier looking at me side-eyed, and I'm not saying that in a negative comment. I'll get to that in a second. We cannot forget, Mr. Speaker, and this pertains to tourism as well, that we get caught up in the 65,000 of Bermuda and the beautiful country that we have. And we forget that even in places like Atlanta, Georgia, where I was blessed to be recently with family, mentioned to a person I was from Bermuda, they said, "Where's that?" Atlanta, Georgia. And I say that because if we don't keep preaching who we are, what we stand for, we're falling behind because other people are doing it better than us. You can just look at the business other countries have picked up. They're doing it better than us. So we support outreaches to allow Bermuda to continue to pull more business in rather than lose people to immigration. Pull more business in, pull more tourists in, Mr. Speaker. And international business was successful through COVID because they managed to find a way to conduct their business from home. People still needed to have reinsurance in many areas, so they were successful. But they were hurt at the end of COVID because of the travel authorization. And I know for a fact that many of those businesses took conferences, milestone achievements to other jurisdictions because of the TA, Mr. Speaker. So I'm thankful that the government has finally got rid of it, probably 9 months too late, but I'm thankful that the government do it. But now we can start to build again from that. You know, the Honorable Minister, Minister Hayward talks about increase in foreign direct investment. That is something that the OBA has talked about in our time in the government and even in our time in the opposition. And to the Honorable Premier, who is now in his seat in the chamber, I will say again that the OBA is willing to work with the government in important areas and in every area. And this is one area we can work together, because I don't like it that Bermuda is struggling. I don't want to sit on government benches just because I'd be the government rather than the opposition. Because if the country's still struggling, you got a hell of a job to do. And it's not easy. So we're willing to work together because direct foreign investment is one of the quickest ways for us to rebuild the engine of Bermuda that's struggling. And now that people are starting to understand that we can move on from COVID, there is a lot of money that's coming off the sidelines and people want to invest it, whether it's in business, whether it's in hotel development. But Mr. Speaker, we need to be able to fan off some of these opportunities that are not successful. And why do I say that, Mr. Speaker? Because when the opposition speaks, if we have some criticism, from time to time, we get it right. We might not always have it right, but from time to time, we have right. And we've been critical of the vertical farming. And look what happened, Mr. Speaker. It's on hold right now, Mr. Speaker. And the challenge with that is that everyone in the industry in Bermuda didn't have much support for it. And then the arm in government, BEDC, went out and got behind it without Bermuda involvement, and now we see it going nowhere, Mr. Speaker. Well, we need to understand that if the experts here in Bermuda believe their challenges, we should try to work through it with them to get in a better position, because farming initiatives are important to this community, certainly as we try to make sure we have sustainable development and government's commitment to climate change, which we support. I mean, we can't just keep talking about it. It's real. We live out in the middle of the ocean. We know what's happening, Mr. Speaker. I've lived on the ocean all my life, and I see the ravages, how it's changed through the years, Mr. Speaker. And so, government needs to understand that here in the opposition, when we criticize, like we did with arbitrate, Mr. Speaker, we criticized arbitrate in the very beginning, and we were proven to be right. Perhaps if those comments were taken on board, we could have saved some of the challenges and the embarrassments that we had, Mr. Speaker, but we didn't. Now, Mr. Speaker, going back to the Premier's throne speech read out by the Deputy Governor. If you'll allow me to go back to the last 2 pages again. There's 2 issues. Mr. Speaker, there's the last 2 pages. There's 2 items I'd like to just touch back on. It's about this working together. And I've already been there, but I want to go back again, Mr. Speaker, because I'm tired of adversarial politics, although if I had to, I'll get back into the gutter when I need to be, because sometimes enough's enough. But the opposition is genuine about working with this government. And if you can look at the opposition leader, he is a man that will have a conversation with anybody, and he's not a hateful person. He's very engaging. He brings a great deal of experience to the table, and he's a person that will work with the government. I can name all my 6 colleagues up here. Sorry, 5 colleagues up here, Mr. Speaker, the same way. Well, Mr. Kane sits behind me. I'm starting to think he might be coming across pretty soon. He's getting close. I think he likes, no. But Mr. Speaker, if we're serious about that, the Premier and his colleagues need to show that they're going to turn over that leaf and be the government that will consult and lose some of their opposition angst when we had the blockade because of the airport debate. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine if the PLP was the loyal opposition now and the OBA was the government and we were implementing primary school reform, what would happen? I don't need to state. General public would tell you there'd be demonstrations. And the Honorable Premier says there was consultation. Mr. Speaker, just like when they demonstrated against the OBA, we had consultation, but they shut it down. They shut it down, Mr. Speaker, right? And the Honorable Premier can wrap up, but I must be touching a word. They shut it down. Immigration reform. The first meeting was shut down. Just down the hall, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Point of order, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member
Point
is
of order,
completely
continue, point of
misleading this
order.
House. The record will reflect on the matter of the airport. There was a press conference 2 weeks after the throne speech without a single mention of the airport, where the former Minister of Finance announced that they'd entered an agreement to privatize the airport. In addition, Mr. Speaker, when it came to pathways to status, right after the by-election, which brought this honorable member into the House, the very next day, the former member from that side announced what they were going to do on pathways to status. When this honorable member started with education reform, there was an outline and it went out to broad public consultation before any decisions were made and decisions were public. The honorable member is misleading the House.
Be mindful of that, ma'am, and continue on.
Mr. Speaker, I hear the Honorable Premier, but I will move on and have to disagree with what the Honorable Premier says, Mr. Speaker, because it's clear that this opposition is willing to listen and work and not shut things down. Could you imagine, Mr. Speaker? And I'm going to move on from this point from here. But the former finance minister who challenged the Premier resigned over issues he had with Fairmount, Southampton, and GenCom. Can you imagine if the OBA was in that position, what the PLP and opposition would have done? Because the waters were definitely muddled by the Premier's announcements through time, if you track them. They were definitely over here, back over here, and a real confusion, and the situation changed, and the waters are still muddled, timelines have been missed, we move on. Can you imagine if that was the OBA? GenCom would have probably fled the island because there would have been demonstrations, Mr. Speaker. But we know how important that development is, Mr. Speaker. And we want to work with the government to make it happen. But we can't even get clear answers on what's taking place with the timeline. So, Mr. Speaker, if the Honorable Premier wants to be genuine about working together, the door will be open with the opposition. The last thing I'll talk about, Mr. Speaker, is independence. The Honorable Member from Constituency 8, Cole Simons, opposition leader, I think hit the nail on the head. Mr. Speaker, I have no issue with the subject of independence and debating which way Bermuda wants to go. But now, as we face certainly the most difficult time in this century, and perhaps the most difficult time in my adult life, the emotive issue of independence, my fear would be, Mr. Speaker, that it would take us away from the very real progress we need to make. And I warn government in the politest terms that we need to be focused on the game. Too many Bermudians are struggling. I don't need to go over the reasons why, Mr. Speaker, and it's not entirely the government's fault, but they need results, because I do not want to see people continue to leave the island, and I do not want to see those people here struggle more because of the challenges that they face. We support Bermuda from one end of the island to the other, and any progress this government can make and any good initiative they can make, we'll be there. But when they slip, we will call them out, but we'll always be ready to work with them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 second left.
Thank you, honorable member. Does any other